start. They advised me to put in $100 to start. One of them said if you put in $100 in 2017, today it would be worth like $55.
Okay, folks, things continue to look good with this synchronous vibrator that I rebuilt. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed to take the tubes back out, take the synchronous vibrator out here, take note of all my readings here, and get this tuning condenser removed, run it through the ultrasonic cleaner, and start cleaning up some of the other crud here on top of the chassis itself. Back to the slideshow here for a few minutes. You can see the fasteners that I have to remove, and one of the nuts was already missing there, so it makes me wonder if this tuning condenser had already been out at one point in time. But you got the two there closest to the volume control, or right underneath it. And then you can see this other piece that actually allows the dial pointer to attach back to the spindle of the tuning condenser here. It simply just slides off. Very simplistic design for sure. Two additional fasteners here for the brackets that hold the dial plate in place there on the chassis itself. And here's that trimmer that's soldered on here to one of the IF cans back over to the one section of the tuning condenser. And you can see I've got the big gun out here, and removing it from the IF can itself. In addition, here I'll be taking some time to remove it from the tuning condenser before throwing this thing into the ultrasonic cleaner here and giving it a good bath. And there's just a quick photo as well of the dial lamp bracket. And here I'm taking that little patter or trimmer, and I'm just making a note of the capacitance. Reason for that, I'm going to take it apart, clean it with some alcohol, some component cleaner, and then I want to preset it back to where it was at. Here's the old tuning condenser mounted back in the chassis, and you can see it cleaned up well. As you can see here, I've configured my input power. I'm using a female power jack. It's a 2.1 millimeter times 5.5 millimeter jack through some grommets, and I'll expand on that in just a moment. Here I'm just routing my input DC back through the hole here, and you can see again the photo I just shared. I used two grommets inside of each other, so this can easily be removed in the future as needed. To this point, I've been powering the radio, doing all my testing using this little 5 amp 6 volt supply. More to come on that in a future video. As I noted in a prior video, the field coil leads themselves were frayed, not repairable, so I just took time here to replace those. And here's one more look itself underneath the chassis, the power supply, before I throw the cover back on. Close up here of the beautiful black dial. A few scars here. Back installed here with the dial lamp in place. Now let's move along here. Do some troubleshooting on that on-off volume control that I mentioned earlier. See if we can square it up. Okay folks, let's take a look at R7 here, the volume control. Schematic calls this out at a 400,000 ohm potentiometer, and that's not what we have installed. My guess is that someone had replaced this particular on-off potentiometer before, most likely due to the on-off switch failing, due to the 2 amps of current on that input side. I'm just speculating, but you can see I'm just north of 600,000. Probably no big deal. I think my problem with the switch is twofold. When I had it in the radio and I was checking my B plus voltage, I noticed when I went through the switch there seemed to be some resistance on the on-off side, and it would kill my B plus under load. Now, I was using these jumpers, so it may have been the jumpers themselves, not the switch. Either way, I need to open this thing up and see if it's repairable. If not, I'll just look for a replacement. We'll go back over here to the wiper, and you can see when I move it around, we start here, and I'll move it back. There's some problems with it, and it's typical. My guess is the carbon track itself is dirty or just bad. I think when I get about this point right here, you can see I've got kind of a dead zone in that area. Same there. And then we get back down here and it actually climbs some. If I switch over here to the other side, I'm rotating slowly, nothing is happening, so I'm not seeing that resistance change till I get to, somewhere in here. And that's turning the volume up, of course. And when I get to this point, you can see what's occurring. It just drops off. So let me open this thing up real quick. We'll bend these little tabs back here that you can see on the corners. Hopefully they won't break off. If they do, it is what it is, because this thing's already defective anyway. And see if we can clean it out and make any improvement whatsoever. And while we're in there, as I mentioned, we'll check the on and off and try to clean it up as well. I don't have a low enough power resistor to create a load to test the on and off with my 6-volt supply, so we'll actually wire it back up and see how it performs in the radio itself under load. You guys can see I've got 6 of these little small tabs that hold the potentiometer in place. I'm going to just use my small CHP 170s here and try to get up underneath these areas. I could do the same with just a small screwdriver and pry these open. Let me go ahead and do that off camera. I'll come back, we'll pull this thing out and take a look at it together. Just one example, these things have a nice sharp edge, so it allows you to get right underneath there, and of course I don't want to cut through it, so I'm just applying very light pressure to get these things open. I'll do one more here. Here's a look at the can itself, and you can see some corrosion here around the outside. We'll try to clean all this out. A little bit of dust, dirt, bugs in this area. And the on-off switch itself is embedded underneath this cover. I don't think at first I'm going to take this apart, take any chances of breaking these tabs off here. I'm going to just spray this real well with some contact cleaner followed by some deoxit. We'll put it back in the circuit and check everything real well. Let me get my blower and just blow this out, get any dust, dirt that I can out of this area before cleaning. And I'll probably clean first with alcohol, then use some contact cleaner followed by deoxit down in this area. Now regarding the volume control itself, you're not going to be able to see it here, but the carbon track itself resides right here. And there's this small contact piece here that makes contact closure with it. Let me get the meter hooked up here and I'll rotate this around and you guys can probably see the movement. And it looks like my trouble spot, or one of my trouble spots, is right in this area. But somewhere right in there is that spot we were looking at. Alright, let me do the same thing here. I'm going to take and just blow this thing out real well, try to free it of any dust or bugs or anything down in there. Okay folks, I just used a little bit of my CRC electronic cleaner and got in here and cleaned this out. The other thing I did, where the wiper contact is, and I apologize, this may not be showing up on camera, but you can see this little brass piece here that lays down on top of the carbon track. I actually pried it up as well and cleaned underneath it, and then rotated the spindle around. I'm going to clean it here a couple more times, and then we'll do a test here from the wiper back to both sides and see if it tracks a little better than it was. Alright, I wouldn't call this a total fix, but I think it's tracking a lot better. You can see here, go back here real slow. Still very, very sensitive in that area. But tracking a lot better through here. And if I switch here and go back to the other side, go back the opposite direction. Go back here to the max first. Just turning this counterclockwise now. Right in here is where we had that big drop out before. And it seems to be a lot smoother through that transition. Alright, let me clean the switch and get this thing back together. We'll get it back in the set, and we'll have it on standby for the next power up. See if it actually responds well enough to let it be, even though the value is about what, 200,000 ohms north of the schematic itself. Little tip here, make sure your switch is in the right position before you put everything back together. If not, your switch won't activate. Let's see if this is in the right position or wrong position. Okay, that's the correct position. If I had this in the other position here, you can hear I can rotate around, but the switch itself will not engage here. So I've done this before, probably 3 or 4 times. Get it back together only to take it back apart and destroy the tabs at that point that hold things down. One last test here, everything back together on the switch itself, just making sure we've got continuity, everything looks good. As I mentioned, this is not under load. When I was under load, it appeared the switch was breaking down, or would not allow enough of the current to flow due to resistance possibly built up on the contacts themselves. So we won't know till I get this back in and put the switch under load if it's still usable or not. And we'll go back to the volume control here, and I tell you, it does track a lot better than it did before. Get out of the way so you guys can see. Okay, and we'll switch the lead back around here. A little touchy right in there, but it's not jumping around like it was. If I turn it slowly, I can control that. Bring it back down past that point again. Just a little touchy right in that area. Slow back down here. Okay, here you have it. Much improved, you know, over what we started with, just by cleaning up the contacts there in that carbon track. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up with alcohol and do some desoldering here on the tabs as well as here. Get this thing ready to place back in the chassis here. You can see here, guys, I'm just letting the radio warm up here. It's been playing for about 30 minutes. We're getting ready to kick off the RF alignment here in another video, but you can see I finished cleaning the chassis. Not a complete restore or repaint of the chassis. There was a little bit of pitting in this area and some rust, and spoke with my dad, and we decided to let it be for now. So just a nice overall cleaning of the chassis, the tube sockets themselves, and actually want to leave the tube shield here that's a mismatch as well for now, unless we run across one in one of our junk sets. But it cleaned up really good, and not much rust here, but not worth spending the time on this particular radio as far as value on a complete restore. You can see the tuning condenser now much cleaner and in really good shape now after running it through the ultrasonic cleaner. And again, I had mentioned earlier about the B Plus now. Really satisfied with that. Those leads I was using to test the vibrator, the transformer, and associated components were just not thick enough gauge to let the current flow through. So I'll recheck the current here, but I think we're drawing somewhere around 2 amps of current, or about 2.2 amps of current on the DC side. And my B Plus here is tremendously close to the schematic now, within a volt or so. Speaker itself's got just a little bit of rattle. I've tried to go around and clean up around the center pole piece, and you know, there may still be some crud or something down in there, but we're not going to spend any additional time on that. So anyway, that concludes this video. Let's move along now to the RF alignment here. Make sure this thing's in peak performance, and then we'll get that cabinet started as quickly as possible. Appreciate you guys watching.